I noticed when Trump got elected for the second time, there was some cautious optimism in Moscow. I guess the assumption or hope was that there's a century of conflict between the US and Russia could come to an end because a lot of this, of course, was communism. And then, of course, after the Cold War, it was the efforts of preserving, well, essentially the Cold War security architecture, which then revived the Cold War logic with Russia. But the idea that in a multipolar world, the Russians and the Americans could be actually friends, if not allies, it was appealing. Again, that yeah, that they could take out, I guess, the root of the conflict. But uh, the belief in Trump though has diminished. He keeps talking about sanctions against Russia. The need to harm its economy. There's still U.S. weapons being used against Russia. It's the CIA which operates and does the intelligence. We saw this New York Times article in which Trump had given the green light to attack Russian refineries and ships. I mean, we already crossed the line long ago of what was a proxy war. This is very direct. And now, of course, boarding the Russian ships, which is it's very hard. You can't let this go because if this is accepted, it becomes the new norm. And now suddenly all Russian ships at sea can be intercepted. You even hear now more aggressive rhetoric from the Europeans saying, "Oh, we can also board their ships. We can make it seem legal." I mean, are we heading towards a major war here?
Yeah, I mean, we are. This is a very dangerous period of time. Look, I was one of those people that shared, you know, sort of cautious optimism that Trump was serious about peace. I really did. I knew that he had to fight the deep state, but I thought that it was Donald Trump versus the deep state, and I think the Russians believe that as well. But what we're finding out is that Donald Trump didn't just surround himself with Russophobic personalities who don't believe in, not just don't believe in good relations, but actively seek to destroy Russia. Scott Bessent, the Secretary of Treasury, he believes that he can bring Russia to its knees, that he can physically destroy the Russian economy, and he wants to do that. He is supported by members of Congress. Lindsey Graham is one of them. I just thought that, that was, Trump saying, okay, speak loudly and, we'll keep the pressure on the Russians until we get this deal and then I'll come in and fix everything. But it appears that no, President Trump has been behind this economic strangulation plan forever, that everything he was doing with Russia was a lie. It was a setup, that Alaska was never meant. I thought, again, my mind gets blown sometimes. Julia Gerganis was the former national intelligence officer of Russia Eurasia back in 2016, and she honchoed the 2017 intelligence community assessment that said that Donald Trump was colluding with the Russians to steal the election in 2016. She knew it was a lie. She doctored the intelligence, and then when it looked like she was going to get called out, they put her into sort of a semi-retirement. They gave her she was still a CIA officer, but they put her in one of the think tanks in Washington, D.C. Well, she was pulled out of that think tank. Shortly before she was pulled out, John Ratcliffe, the CIA director, underwent an emergency whitewashing. I guess it found out that Tulsi Gabbard was getting ready to release the Gates report and other reports that would expose the deception and criminality of the intelligence community in manufacturing a case against Trump regarding Russia. So he published a 5-page declassified memorandum that basically gave Julia Gerganis a clean bill of health. This is a woman who's on record saying, I hate Donald Trump and I want to bring Donald Trump down. But he whitewashes her, and she's on the airplane briefing Donald Trump on his way to meet Putin. I used to think that was just a big mistake. I now believe that Donald Trump knew that this was a lady who hates Russia and that Donald Trump has won the CIA over by telling them, no, I'm not a Russian asset. I'm Russia's worst enemy. I'm Russia's worst nightmare. Tell me what I need to do to set Putin up. I believe Trump went to Alaska to set Vladimir Putin up. And how do you set him up? You use Kirill Dmitriev. You create this artificial notion that sanctions can be lifted, and when they are lifted, it's going to be a glorious economic renaissance for Russia and the United States. And then what happens is Putin buys into that, comes back, and they start holding meetings. We want to, revitalize oil production in the north. Oh, well, let's call the mayor and the governor. You guys get a committee together and tell us what we need to do. What are our number one priorities? And people start planning about the better times they're going to come. And they start spending that money before they have it. And what you've done there is you've carried out mental warfare, and you've created a fifth column inside Russia of people who are now anticipating the lifting of sanctions, which are never going to be lifted, by the way. But then Trump says they're not going to be lifted because of Vladimir Putin. He's the one. I'm not happy with Putin. I think Putin's the problem. I think Putin's this. And the idea is to create a wedge between Putin and the political and economic elites who are now, enthralled about the potential lifting of sanctions. That's what Donald Trump did. Radcliffe, he didn't carry out these. The New York Times article came out at an interesting time because it was timed literally for the assassination attempt against Putin. I believe the article may have had a different headline and some paragraphs that were removed because I think the article was, hey, look what we did. We're the CIA. We were really doing this all the time. And then when it failed and the Russians found out, they changed it, but they didn't change the article. The CIA had to openly collaborate with the New York Times for this article. This is highly classified information. The idea that the CIA is enabling Ukraine to strike Russian oil refining capacity in specific components in there, the precision necessary. And the CIA is doing this at a time when the president is talking about the spirit of Alaska. It means it's a setup. It's a lie. There was never a spirit of Alaska. The CIA is at war with Russia today, at war with Russia. The CIA is killing Russians. Scott Bessent, Secretary or Department of the Treasury, is at war with Russia, trying to destroy the Russian economy. Marco Rubio is at war with Russia, seeking the isolation. Remember, Rubio is dual-hatted. And this is where the ultimate nefariousness comes in, because he can be the Secretary of State and say, hey, we're all for diplomacy. Remember his little snide comment? Hey, Sergey, how you doing? Like he's friends with Sergey Lavrov. He's not. He hates Sergey Lavrov. We know he hates Sergey Lavrov because he said it. He hates Sergey Lavrov. He hates every Russian. But he's pretending that he's diplomatic. Then he goes and puts on his national security advisor hat, where he's not accountable to anybody but the president. And he's the one who greenlights the CIA attacks. It goes through the national security advisor. The CIA goes through him. The Treasury Department goes through him. Rubio is running this anti-Russian campaign as the national security advisor. So Donald Trump's been a liar from day one. Day one. And I think the Russians are waking up to this reality. Of course, the Russians are pragmatic. And as Lavrov said, we won't end negotiations or discussions with the Americans. The Russians never fully walk away, but they're going nowhere. The Russians can't trust these people at all. I mean, if they do trust these people, then you have to question, are the Russians really as capable as everybody says they are, including myself? You can't trust the United States. You can't trust Donald Trump. And now you layer this with people who, I mean, the whole boat thing, just to show you how stupid people are. The reflagging of this boat, this tanker. I think it was a Ghanaian ship, or Guianan ship, maybe. It reflagged in process, not illegal, not normal, but not illegal. But the Russians used a process that only has legitimacy in Russian territorial waters. It's sort of a domestic law kind of thing. It doesn't really apply to ships on the open sea. In fact, the law of the sea, you can't have a dual flag ship. The flag that the ship set out on is sort of the flag it has to be. If it changes flag, then it has no flag. So the Russians set themselves up on this one. It wasn't a good move, and the Russians themselves have sort of admitted that's why Russia's been quiet. Everybody's like, why is Russia quiet? Because they're weak. No, they messed up. They reflagged the vessel in a way that is unenforceable. But the problem with this is that Europe and the United States are picking up on Russia's non-reaction as a sign of weakness. And now they're talking about going against actual flagged Russian ships. That would be a fatal mistake because the Russian Navy will intervene. The Russians are very legal. The Russian Navy had no legal authority to intervene on behalf of this alleged Russian reflagged ship because there was no legitimacy to that ship. The ship actually didn't have a flag now because of what had happened. But that doesn't mean that the Russian Navy won't intervene if you go after a Russian ship. And now you got the British saying, well, we're going to change our laws so we can board ships. You have the Danes saying, we're going to prove the Americans that we're really important members of NATO and we're going to board ships. And you have the Norwegians wanting to board. Everybody wants to board Russian ships now. Russians are going to kill you. Kill you. How stupid can you be? Well, it's a rhetorical question because we know the answer. Very stupid.